Hello again, this is Bill Lindemann with the Believers Business Center show. I'm here with Carrie Sluiter and attorney Victor Bland, who is a general attorney, but also specializes in family practice. And we're here to discuss legal rights. Is that right, Carrie?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, it is. And we want to thank you, Victor, for being here
Yes,
today
thank you.
and for joining us on our show. And
My pleasure.
Really appreciate you being here. We had announced a couple of weeks ago on our show that if people had questions that they wanted to ask for an attorney, that we would have you on the show. And so we had a couple of questions that came in. But before we talk about the questions, I'd like to have you talk a little bit about what you do and describe your practice a little bit more clear to make sure we gave a good description of your practice, and introduce yourself.
Well, I'd be happy to, and I think it was a good description.
Okay.
I'm sort of a general practice attorney, but I would probably categorize myself more of as a trial attorney. I spend probably some part of every day in court, litigating various issues, some of them criminal, some of them family-oriented. And actually, in today's day and age, a little bit of overlap, because you have things such as domestic violence, which usually obviously occurs to a family member or something like that. But my practice is primarily being in court, litigating these issues, helping people get from the beginning of a legal problem to the end of it.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, I can speak from firsthand experience, and that we had recently had a situation that you were able to help us to get custody of my husband's children, and you did a fantastic job.
Thank you.
We were really grateful to you for everything that you did. And one of the topics that I want to talk about after we answer the questions here that we had come in is I'd like to go back to that topic of gaining custody of children and how that all came about. So let's jump to a couple of the questions, and we'll kind of break the ice here. We had a couple of questions came in, and one of them was, if you have had your children taken for the cause, when you become pregnant, will your other child be taken as well?
And the answer, unfortunately, is that depends.
Okay.
If it was a situation where maybe your children were taken 20 years ago and this is a new family and there's been a lot of transition in the meantime, I would say probably DHS or CPS is not going to show up at the hospital. However, conversely, if your parental rights were terminated, say, in the last 5 years, and perhaps it was something to do with drug use or substance abuse, I would expect that CPS would be at the hospital at that point. They would take the child. Does not mean necessarily that that's a permanent situation. It may be something where you can go in and say, well, yes, I did have these children terminated for these reasons, but I've dealt with that. I'm not in the same situation I was before. You need to give me a chance.
Right. So, and that's something that, so they can go back and petition to get those children back, or to stop it.
There is a legal proceeding that goes about them taking the child in the first place. So it has to be a court order. And so they may take the child at the hospital, but there would be an opportunity to have due process. There would be an opportunity to air what the person's side of the story is, certainly.
Okay. Great. And if a person has a situation like that, they could call you and ask, have you step in? Or is that something that you can do to stop that procedure, or to work with that family to stop it, or
yes,
to gain their rights back?
As part of due process, anyone who is in that type of proceeding, again, we're talking about the removal of a child because of past terminations of parental rights. At any legal proceeding, they have a right to have counsel. Right. Now, they actually do have court-appointed counsel quite a few times. That's available. But I have handled situations like that. I think probably the main argument I go in with is the idea that, yes, this happened at this time, but these are the steps that are taken. Give me a chance. And I think, you know, the DHS is from the executive branch of government. They're lined up with the governor and so forth. The courts are a different branch of government. And while, you know, DHS may argue we can never trust this person again, I think the courts a lot of times are willing to say, can we work into this? Can we put this particular parent in a program that will help us know that they are safe for their children?
Right, okay, all right. Okay, the next question was, your children require discipline. How do you handle it without being afraid that the children will call the authorities, and what is allowed?
It's a good question, and it's
That's one a lot of us struggle with.
not always easily answered, but in the state of Michigan, you are allowed to use what we call corporal punishment. There's no law that says that you cannot spank a child or slap a child's hand or do that if it's appropriate for you as a parent to do. And there's an actual statute on the books. Sort of what I would call the informal rule of thumb, again, for the DHS and the CPS, so forth, is if your corporal punishment leaves a mark on a child, a bruise, a red mark, something like that, then you have probably edged over into the type of corporal punishment that is not, that is frowned upon at that point. I would certainly never recommend that anybody use a belt in this day and age on a child. And again, I think CPS is going to look at that almost lockstep as being abuse, but it also is more likely to leave bruises and so forth. So I don't think the mere fact that a child is physically touched would do much, again, depending on the marks. Would I recommend necessarily that that's the way to handle discipline of children? And I would say very, very limited fashion in this day and age. I know that both of you are aware of timeouts and you know, positive reinforcement in terms of, I see a lot of charts where kids get stars for doing this, and this right. So I would encourage anybody out there to take that manner. But you know, I say candidly, I did spank my children on occasion when they were young, but I don't think I spanked either one of them after they were about 5 years old.
Right. Well, my rule of thumb was, you know, my toddler is when they touched something, they reached out and touched it, I said no. You know, after I'd said no, and they learned just like that. Both of them were just right on that. And I didn't feel that that was abuse or really spanking, and I never left. It was just a little, I said. And they learned that when I said it the first time, not to push me. Never, you know, I never counted to 3. You know, it was tell them once, and then that. So.
Well, of course, I'm not a child psychologist, but
Right.
consistency goes a long way.
Consistency, yes.
Goes a long way, I
Yes.
think, in these
Yeah,
situations.
fair, firm, and consistent. We
Yes.
like
Yes,
that.
ma'am.
We like that way to look at it. Okay, well, another one that came up in our conversations earlier was driver responsibility fees. I understand you handle some driver responsibility issues, or driving issues?
Yeah,
Driver's license issues, there we go.
I think driver's responsibility fees are one of these things that sounded really good to the legislature at the time, and unfortunately, I think we're taxing the poor with these and simply keeping people in a cycle.
Right.
Because if I'm a person who's out driving while license suspended and I get picked up, chances are I'm driving while license suspended because I can't afford to clear up my license in the first
Right,
place.
and you can't go to work without a license.
And can't go to work without a license,
Can't get kids to school, it goes on.
and you get driver's responsibility fees, and they add on and simply keep this person in what I will call a licenseless state a lot of times, which doesn't help any of us. I think if you talk to most of the district judges in this county, I would guess most of them are not terribly in favor of these driver's responsibility fees. But whether we like them or not, they're here.
Is there a way to get them, is there ways that people can go about getting them lessened or removed to get their license back?
Yes, and the first step I would recommend in that is to get an attorney when you go in for your, whatever offense that you're facing, whether it's driving while intoxicated, driving while license suspended, leaving the scene. In plea bargaining, you can address the driver's responsibility fees. For instance, on what I'll call a full drunk driving, an OWI, operating while intoxicated, I believe it's $1,000 a year is the driver's responsibility fee. If the prosecutor would allow you to plea bargain and plead to a lesser charge, in this case, operating while impaired, now those terms unfortunately are very, very similar, but one's driving while intoxicated, one's operating while impaired, then those fees are reduced to $500 a year. So the first step is when I'm in there, don't just say, oh my gosh, the police officer got me, I give up, because you're going to get the higher driver's responsibility fee. Secondly, the Secretary of State, if you call them, will work out a payment plan with you. So if you do have $1,000, say, driver's responsibility fee, they will allow you to pay that over 12 months, so you can pay so much per month. Now, there is not a judicial process that allows you to go to a judge and say, would you remove that fee? But there are ways to handle it, I think, like I said, through what you plead to and do you set up a payment plan. And my understanding is as long as you're set up on the payment plan, you're still allowed to, and you're paying it consistently, you're allowed to still have your license. You're not suspended at that point. So I think the real answer is to be proactive on these.
Okay. And what about the person who already has lost their license to get it back? Can they have that payment plan while they're getting and have their license back so that they can go to work and go back to life?
I believe the answer is yes, you can have the payment plan, and I think after a certain point, the Secretary of State will clear you to be able to go to a driver's license appeal division hearing, or in some circumstances, you can go directly to the circuit court and have your license restored.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good information to have.
Yeah, I might add that I had a friend whose living depended on his having transportation, his truck. And he had his license suspended. It took him a lot of work, but he did, and he was willing to work with the authorities, and they worked with him. So it can be done.
It can be done. Yeah. There's not necessarily step-by-step that the state of Michigan is going to give you, but I think most of the attorneys in this area would be able to say, okay, you need to take this step first and this step second, and you're right, if they work the program, I have found most of the time the driver's license appeal division to be receptive to that.
Yes, and it worked for him, which is good. Yeah.
Well, I know a lot of people are really held back. It's like you said, it's kind of sticking them in a situation that's worse off than not, it's hard for them to get out of it once they get all those fines and court costs, and then you stack on another responsibility. It's hard for people to get back out from underneath that and get back on track, and that can keep a person depressed enough. I've seen some people in counseling, through the counseling, that have actually been kept back and put backwards because of that, feeling like they can't achieve and can't overcome it. So
we create this class of, as I said, licenseless people, and there's very limited public transportation on this side of the state. I won't say there's none, but if you live in Vicksburg and you have a job on the north side of Kalamazoo and you don't have a driver's license, very difficult to do that. And people make the choice that it's an unfortunately bad choice, but they make a choice that, hey, if it's between bringing money home and not driving, I'm going to bring money home. And you're right about people being depressed, because one thing a lot of people don't understand is that every time you're convicted of driving while license suspended, your license is suspended for an additional time. So if you start off first with a 1-year suspension and then you're convicted of DWLS, you've effectively turned that into another year. And if you're driving on a 5-year revocation, which happens if you have multiple drunk drivings and they're caught, then you have another 5-year revocation. And I see people in the office that their driver's license are suspended to like 2025. And there's been certain legislative things that have occurred in the last 5 to 10 years that's virtually unappealable in some circumstances. So now we've set, certainly there's the balance. We don't want unsafe drivers out there. Exactly. But the Secretary of State has had a sort of a theory that we just make it harder for these people to get their license back. And as I said, I think we create this class of people trapped in.
Well, yeah, and it does burden the entire family. You know, it puts the weight on the other spouse. You know, and we're talking about dysfunctional families, and we have families that are really struggling, and, you know, the kids aren't, you know, the kids aren't getting to school, whatever it is. It takes two people to run a family and to make an income. And when you have a family household and only one has a license, it really puts a burden on the other one to carry the load. But they have to do all the running to the grocery store, do all, you know, run the kids. And,
Absolutely.
and people make the choices to help out because they're trying to be a good spouse and be a good parent.
Absolutely.
You know, I have to get my kids to school. I can't, you know, take the kids to school, go to the grocery store, go take them to the doctor, all in one day, you know, on a bus or walking. So
Absolutely.
it's really creating a issue. So it's good to know that there are ways that you can get around that. And recapping, you said that being counteractive.
Proactive.
Yeah, proactive.
Proactive.
Being proactive, going in and fighting to begin with to keep it down. But, you know, one of the biggest things we deal with on this show is you don't have to remain where you are. Whatever you've done, you can overcome the challenges in your life.
Yes.
It takes changing your ways. If you're not where you want to be, change your ways. If you keep going down the same road expecting to get somewhere else, it'll never happen. So when a person changes their ways, change your mind, starts trying to fix their life, you can go wherever you want to go to put these things behind you.
I think that's true in a lot of instances. Doing driver's license restoration hearings at the Secretary of State, one of the things they're very concerned about is this person going to AA?
Right,
And do they have a working knowledge of how AA or NA,
right,
any 12-step program, do they have a working knowledge how that program functions? Typically, when I've done these hearings, sometimes I'll have a hearing examiner ask a person, well, what step are you working? And what can you tell me about that step? So again, they're testing, are you working a program? And 12-step programs obviously start with the idea that you're powerless against this substance and you have to turn it over to a higher power.
right, right. And that higher power is something that we all have within us, whether that higher power is in us to create our own outcome. We can get wherever we want to go if we set our mind to it and change our ways. We can prove to the courts, you know, and show them who we are now, today. You can put the past behind you. Whatever you did yesterday is going to determine, you know, how you handle it today is going to determine the outcome. So,
One of the questions I ask often in a hearing regarding driver's license is driving a privilege or a right?
right.
And it's not a right, it's a privilege.
It's a privilege, that's
And
correct.
so it is, just as you said, you have to show, you have to prove that you have changed.
Yeah, it's about the people changing. Once you have changed your ways and realizing that if you don't have what you want out of life, you have to change your ways. You can't expect to have what somebody else has, not doing what they did to get it. You know?
Absolutely.
That's a very true statement. If you want what somebody else has, you have to do what they do. Well, if all of us drove around town, you know, making mistakes over and over again, a mistake happens. And the courts understand that. We can overcome those things and change anything in our life. So, which also brings me to the point that I wanted to really discuss tonight is the putting the past behind you and changing things. You were very successful in helping us through, my husband and I, through a custody suit. And some things from the past had caused a situation where the other parent had the custody of the children. Sole custody, she had gotten sole custody, but my husband at the time was, you know, thinking a bar stool was a better way, you know, was a way to get his children. It took him a little while to realize that, you know what, the bar stool is not going to get me there. He made a decision to change. We came to you, and he turned that whole situation around. Recently got custody of the children. What I wanted you to talk a little bit about the rights that people have in regard to if you have already lost your children, or you have dual, your ex-husband or your ex-spouse has custody of your children, what rights do the people have to get their children back and regain some control or authority over their children?
And I think it's sort of hard to.
You know, it's a big,
It's a big question, and it's hard maybe to deal with it in terms of rights, I think. It's not a situation like where you have Miranda rights, where, you know, you have a right to have a lawyer with you if you're going to be questioned by police or whatever. But you do have a right to a process. You have a right to have judicial review of a prior order. And there's certain things that, and conditions people have to meet to, you know, have a court reverse its prior order. There is certainly a sentiment in the law that if it's not broke, don't fix it. So in other words, if one parent has had custody for quite some time, then now we have what's called I call it a two-step process. Certain judges in town call it a phase 1, phase 2, but the process is, first off, has there been a change in circumstances since the last order? Right. So when the last order was entered, that may have been proper at the time. Maybe one parent was not up to snuff, was not up to raising the children. But since that, and this kind of goes with the redemption and change that we've been talking about, but since that order was entered, maybe it was 5, 10 years ago, what has changed that now is having a significant impact on the life of the child? So if 5 years ago one parent was into substances and was not trying to change, or one parent was not working perhaps, or did not have a stable environment at that time, but since that time, hey, you know, this parent can show a demonstrated addressing of their substance abuse problem, or that they're stable or whatever, well, then that's a change of circumstances. That's having a significant impact on the life of this child. So that gets you over phase 1. And then phase 2, and I think a lot of people are probably aware of this, but there's what we call the best interest factors. These are statutory. There's about 12 of them. And they go through things like who is most closely bonded to the child, who presents the best lifestyle for the child, which parent is seen to the child's religious heritage. Now, you know, it gets a little tricky. Courts are not going to say, well, somebody that's a Christian is better than somebody that's a Jew, that's better than somebody than a Hindu.
Right.
It's not which religion is better, but the thought is that all religions have a certain basic moral compass, if you will, and is one parent seeing to that over the other parent. The other is, you know, can this parent provide materially for the child? You know, if that parent was not working 5 years ago, are they now working something steady that can provide for the children? One of the factors is also who sees to the medical coverage of the child. Now, sometimes that's a tough one too, because if parent A has custody, they may not allow parent B to help take the children to the doctor or so forth. But a lot of times you will find even that the parent that has primary custody, that the non-primary parent, for maybe work reasons or whatever, is able to take the kids to the doctor. And so that factor can be weighted both ways. Another factor the courts look at is what is the new family environment? Has this person that 5 years ago may have been recently divorced, or maybe have been in a series of relationships, is this person now in a steady relationship? Has this person perhaps remarried and had other children that are bonded with this child? Right. Which is a big factor, the sibling factor. One of the factors also is what the moral fitness is the words that are actually used. And this being a believers-based show, it's sort of amazing to me when I say to people sometimes, well, which one of you are more morally fit? People don't know what morals are. They're like, well, what do you mean? I have to explain it. But in any event, you know, I kind of call that factor the drug, sex, and rock and roll factor, if you will. I mean, a little euphemistic, but has one of the parents been convicted of offenses? Mm-hmm. You know, does that one of the parents lie or cheat or steal? And I think the point that you were making is, well, if this has occurred in the past, what is the effect? And again, it's this rehabilitation. Maybe I had a couple drunk drivings in the past. Maybe I was younger and so forth. But where have I gone since then? Have I got my license back?
That's the point is, for example, with our situation, what is the best now for those children? Just because something happened years ago that, under those circumstances, if things change in your life, you get your life in order, and your children are jeopardized or being jeopardized because of a court order that was established before. And that's where ours came into play, where we had the ability to come to you and say, we feel that our children would be better under a different, under a different household or back in this care, because this is a better environment now based on what it was set up on before.
Right. The court may have made the proper choice at the time it made it.
At the time, exactly.
But, and there are mechanisms set up to not make that easily changed.
Right.
Let's just be honest. And the reason for that is courts generally don't think children ought to be flopping back and forth, if you will, between households in terms of custody. But I think the message for the people out there is that there is hope.
There is hope.
There's hope. It's not easy. If you have multiple convictions,
Right.
you are going to be explaining those convictions.
Right.
You're going to be explaining why you committed them and why you're different now. So you just have to sort of accept that. But it's not hopeless by any
Right,
stretch.
nothing.
I want to
Yes,
say
so
that I've been
great.
doing shows like this now for several years. And in Kalamazoo, there's really been a change. You've got the VARS, I think restorative justice. You've got Judge Smay and his drug court. They're really looking at really working with people who want to turn their lives around, and I'm impressed.
Kalamazoo is
Yeah.
a very progressive
Yeah.
community legally. Sometimes that's not always maybe what everyone would agree with, but yeah, the drug courts were virtually started by Judge Schmay.
Sure.
And in fact, he goes around now and consults all over the country about setting them up. And I don't think, we have sort of a younger bench coming in, and they certainly are more along the lines of, well, let's not just focus on the past where maybe mom always got custody. They're really, I think the
Sure.
general thought among our trial judges in the family division right now is that it ought to be a pretty equal environment. Unless you can show me that there are these issues that have not been corrected that we've been talking
Yes,
about.
yes.
But making sure that the children are in the best environment for their growth and maturing and growing and developing. But one of the bigger...
Well, we're just about out of time.
Yeah, one of the most important things is
okay.
the families agree
Sure.
on how they're raising the kids,
Yeah.
if they can get past that. But we want to thank you for being here with us, Victor, and looks like we're running short on time. Do you want to...
We didn't have enough time to go through all the things, but it's been a very short half hour.
Yeah.
No, thank you, Attorney
And
Bland, for
We'd also
for
like to
coming.
invite you back
We
on the
appreciate
show
you.
if the audience
Yes.
has questions, any other questions for an attorney, and you want to send those to us, you can contact us through our website at believersbc.com, and be sure to send us any questions, and we can have them come back on the show.
I'd be
Love
happy to
have
come
you
back.
It's wonderful. So for Carrie and I and Attorney Bland, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
All right, thank you. Have a